Hi, this is Catherine. This is Taking Tea with Catherine. This is Jane's Garden from Harney and Sons because I do like a green tea with a bit of floral, the main one being jasmine. And of course, I read one Miss Marple book in April, so I thought that was fitting because Miss Jane Marple is very fond of her garden. Yay, pairing things up. And so I'm doing a wrap up of the month of April. And I read a lot of books in April, but I only finished five. So, which is surprising because I know I was doing a lot of reading, but that's okay. It's not all about numbers, it's about enjoying, right? And I did enjoy every book that I read. Um, I, though, have a lot of books kind of hanging from the month, so I'm carrying it on. A goal of mine is to do a cleanup in June, which I did last year. I called it my Midsummer Nights cleanup, I think, something like that. So I can prepare for that, but that's a month away, so I don't need to think about that. Um, but I noticed a couple of stats that I'm not 100% happy about. One was that I didn't finish any nonfiction. Even though I enjoyed some nonfiction reading, I did not finish any in the month of April. And 4 out of 5 of the books are books that I do not own, that are library books. I very much encourage library books in terms of if that's what you read mostly, that's fine. It's wonderful. It's a wonderful resource, but I have so many books in my collection that I need to read. So I'm trying to find these balances, but April was maybe not the most balanced month. And you know what? Again, the main thing is that I enjoy what I'm reading, right? And I did, thankfully. Um, and 3 of them are mystery novels. I didn't expect that, but I have no problem with that. I like reading mystery. I particularly like it in the colder months, as far as just my own preference, not a necessary thing. But you know what? April was not cold, but it wasn't hot either. So again, maybe there's the balance. Um, so 5 books. I'm going to start with the non-mystery books. I was going to do the whole tea and mystery with the hat, but the hat is somewhere. Could have been a good thing because my hair is a bit in need of covering up, but whatever. I'm going to start with A Girl of the Limberlost by Jean Stratton Porter, I think. Stratton Porter, which was written around 1910, I think, 1909, 1910-ish, so well over 100 years ago. This was part of the Kindred Spirits book group reading for April, and it was apparently the second book. There was another book, I don't know, I think it was the second one written. It could have been maybe Freckles was a prequel, but there's another book called Freckles that Jean Stratton Porter wrote for this area, the Limberlost, which is in Indiana, apparently, and it's a kind of a swampland. It had been very much kind of taken apart in, over 100 years ago to use for farmland or drilling for oil, all kinds of things. But at this time, it was still pretty actively there. I think conservationists have sort of brought it back a little bit. I know very little about these sort of things, but it was kind of interesting to see that setting. And then some of the scenes took place in Chicago too, but very few. So that was it was mostly in the Limberlost area, and the town nearby and everything. So this is about Elnora Comstock, and she is this really impossibly smart, talented person, which is annoying. Not that I hated the book. I thought the story was great and interesting, and it took you in all kinds of mood swings because sometimes it was a cheerful moment and then suddenly something would happen and you'd be like, ooh, snap, that was intense. Her relationship with her mother is a weird one. Her mother apparently gave birth to her around the same time that their father died. And so the mother just sort of, because of circumstances, developed a dislike for her daughter. Just so, I don't know what you could call it, a blaming her or something. So she's not very supportive of her. So there's a really weird tension between these two. How Elnora wants her mother so much to love her and to care about her and everything. And there's a couple that is, I don't know if they're actual relatives. She calls her aunt and uncle, Wesley, I think, and Margaret, I think that's their names, who kind of are her champions and try to support her as well. But Elnora's kind of proud in her own way. Like, she doesn't want anyone to pay for anything. So there's a lot of I don't know. I don't know if you call it tension between the parents and this couple, and some people in town when she starts going to school and tries to fit in, and then she does eventually, sort of, but also is just so good at everything, and everybody's kind of like, wow, this is such an interesting girl, and she could do anything, and why can't everybody be like her kind of situation, which just got on my nerves. But the story about her collecting moths and moths, like butterflies, but moths. Because I know I didn't say it, it sounded like I said moss. Um, was an interesting story. It was a little bit like nature writing, which got me in a little bit of mood for a springathon for May. It's anything about nature really beyond cats is something I have very little knowledge of. So that was good. I did I did like a number of the characters. There's one called Bird Woman. The Bird Woman, I don't think they ever say her name. She is a somewhat different kind of person, but not overly dwelt on. And it's beautifully written, but it does take a couple of time jumps. There's a couple of plot points that do sort of get left behind. But like I said, I had fun reading it, especially when I would read it outside for some reason. I took it to the park with me a couple of times, and when the weather was decent. And yeah, I would say, yeah, I don't know who it's written for. If it's a young adult sort of book, because it's about a girl. So, and it's got illustrations. I don't want to show the illustration when the first one's here because it kind of gives away like sort of a spoiler from like far into the book, which I don't understand why they would do that. But so yeah, there is a bit of a love story that happens, but it takes a while to happen. But I am glad I read the book, but it does suddenly get like intense, like deaths that you don't expect, and descriptions of, not, well, kind of descriptions of poverty, and one or two moments of animal cruelty that I wasn't crazy about, that seems to be kind of brushed under. But I'm glad I read it because it was a different experience than a lot of what I read. I don't know. Speaking of kind of a different experience, but not, because I do read a lot of historical fiction, and I'm also participating in, reading the historical fiction readathon in May. It is something I'm really into, but American history is something I read. I do. But Civil War era, mid 19th century United States, hasn't always been my thing, and it's something I rarely read anything about. And this isn't necessarily 100% a Civil War book, but of course it does cover that time period at one point, because this is Booth by Karen Joy Fowler. So this is a story about the Booth family, which was a family of mainly, well, at least the males in the family were mainly actors. The father was he came from Britain, he was England, he was a famous Shakespearean actor who moved to the United States with his wife, and they had a bunch of kids. And I mean, so many kids, but a lot of them died, but whatever. And so you get the story of him in the beginning. It's a lot about him and his being kind of just a slightly different kind of father, and how the different points of view from the different children, to Rosalie, to the daughter Asia, to Edwin, who also became a very well-known actor. And through the years, from childhood onto adulthood, after the father dies. That's not a spoiler, that's part of history, that's part of the actual thing that happened in their life. And how the boys of the family struggle, but mostly go toward acting as their calling, or whatever you want to call it, and how all the family kind of behaves in that. And that would be a very interesting story, I think, in itself, just the story of an American family, basically, and their struggles, and their good times and their bad times, and their relationships. But one of the brothers happens to be John Wilkes Booth, who, of course, if you know anything about American history, which, like I said, that time period, not so much for me, but even I knew that he was the man who assassinated Abraham Lincoln, and he's very notorious for that. So you get to know this family, and they don't really have much from his point of view in different parts of the United States. Sometimes it goes overseas, different areas. There's a big chunk of time, well, not a big chunk, but a little coverage of the draft riots that happened in New York in the Civil War, which is a very intense thing that I have read about before. I believe it was covered in Edward Rutherford's New York, which is an amazing, amazing book, by the way. If you haven't had a chance to read that, please do. So that, there's a little bit of him reporting on that a little bit, so you get slightly his point of view. But really, the family, again, not perfect, issues here and there, but they were fine in most ways, a couple of scandals here and there, until suddenly they are the family of the person who killed the president, which is, of course, makes them a very disliked family. And it does take a while for any of them to regain any sense of a reputation. I did find out that the daughter, the sister of John Wilkes Booth, Asia, had started to write about, with John actually, Wilkes Booth, a little bit about their father, but then she carried on to write more about her brother. So I gotta get a hold of that one day to see if that writing is any good. Because I mean, you would think that would be a very weird thing to write. Like, would you be justifying your brother's behavior, or would you just be writing the facts about his life and the good and the bad? I don't know. So that would be a really interesting book to read. I thought it was very beautifully written, very colorful, very intense sometimes, but not intense like Girl of the Limberlost. It's just a different type of family and the way they get along with each other. Of course, there's a lot of sort of imagination, speculation, because the I think eldest daughter, Rosalie, is kind of described as I don't like to use the word deformed, but she's got some kind of unbalanced shoulders. It makes her sound a little bit like Richard III, which is kind of fitting because the father and the sons participate in acting out various roles in Richard III. That is a very amazing correlation there. But we don't know much about this particular daughter, or sister. So it is a lot of imagination written. She is kind of portrayed as kind of a sad creature, but I don't necessarily know what people think sad is when it comes to a woman who just never gets married. Is that like the ultimate tragedy in life? Because in my point of view, not so much. But if you like historical fiction, excuse me, that tea didn't go down quite right, I would really recommend this one. This was one of my favorite books of the month. I don't think I gave it enough justice, really. So now I'm just getting into the mystery. Just imagine the hat, okay? The Miss Marple, of course. This is Agatha Christie's What Mrs. McGillicuddy Saw, which I think is called, let's see, 450, yes, 450 from Paddington, which is the British title. Again, weird that they have to change the titles, but why not? So the premise of the story is that a woman is riding a train, and at one point, two trains are crossing. I don't know if they're going in separate directions or the same direction. I can't remember now. I think separate directions. I think. And this woman, Mrs. McGillicuddy, sorry, sees at one point a man strangle a woman to death. She can't really see the man, but she definitely sees the crime and can't get most people to believe her. She's a little upset about that because she's not the kind of person who just has flights of fancy. So she goes to see her friend, Miss Marple, who believes her, who starts an investigation, who enlists the help of a friend after doing some thinking. This friend whose name is escaping me now, which is really sad because she was a main part of the book, but I read this like weeks and weeks and weeks ago, so names are gone. But this friend is a woman who is sort of like a housekeeper, but like in a kind of a different, like for hire, that comes and does all kinds of great work and then gets paid really well. But she attaches herself to this house, this big house that's kind of not, has seen better days. But there's the patriarch, who's a grumpy man who kind of wants to outlive all of his sons. And there's a bunch of sons, and there's one living daughter, and there's at least one grandchild. There's a couple of grandchildren, I think, but at least one grandchild who is probably one of my favorite characters in the book, which is rare. Like I think I said this in another video. It's rare that I like a kid character in these kind of books, but he was well done. And because there just seems to be a connection between this house and this crime that Miss Marple puts together, and there definitely is. So there's poisoning involved. There's all kinds of uh, weird relationships between the siblings and between the father, and of course, in the end, it's figured out. I like to say that I knew who did it from the beginning, but I really believe I've already seen at least one adaptation, and it was just stuck in my head. And because I've had this book for years, I might have read it already. I have two versions of it. I have it in another collection. So I probably read it back in the 90s, and so I am not brilliant. I didn't figure it out just on my own, but it was good. I don't think it was one of the best of the Miss Marples. I just don't think it was bad. I thought it was an interesting enough read. I always feel like I could use more of herself, Miss Marple, in the story, but she does come in at the right time usually and gives her thoughts and opinions, and of course comes up with the solution at the ending. And usually the as usual, the policemen or detectives working with these cases sometimes are surprised that this woman is here, and then suddenly realizes her genius, I guess you would say. And yeah, and there's a little bit about her gardening in the beginning, which I like. It always makes me kind of jealous because I never had a garden in my life. But I could visit a botanical gardens or something, right? I mean, come on. But anyway, I'm digressing. I'm glad I read that one because I was overdue for an Agatha Christie, and I didn't read one in March. So now here's another one that I say is combination mystery novel and historical fiction, and that is For the Love of Mike by Rhys Bowen. This is the third book in the series of the Molly Murphy mysteries. I'm really enjoying these. In this case, Molly has kind of established herself, or I wouldn't say fully, but is starting to establish herself in her own head as a detective, but she's still trying to get proper clients on her own. And in the beginning, she finds the difficulties of being a woman and being a detective, and the trouble it could get her into, because people see a woman standing around at night and they could either be really messed up to her, or the police could think she's up to no good. So she's dealing with this, but she gets basically she advertises herself in the way of being someone who to people in the old world, to people in Europe who sent their children abroad, or not sent their children abroad, who sent anyone abroad, like who had family or anybody that they knew that went to America, or who likely went to America, and they've not heard from them. She decided early on, actually, in the series, that she wanted to help people get connected, which is ironic because she doesn't really want to be connected with her past, but she sees where it could help other people. So between that connection, someone actually asks her to find their daughter, a very well-off, well-connected family in, I believe, in Ireland, but they're English, have, their daughter seems to have absconded with, eloped with a man and probably went to America. So that's one aspect of the investigation. And then randomly, she gets another case to investigate, which has to do with a factory worker in a garment, in the garment district. I guess this is a different garment district than I'm familiar with in the future, but because it's a different part of Manhattan, but that doesn't really matter. But so he has all these employees working in this place, kind of like with all these sewing machines and cutting and whatever, making different parts of garments, and he believes that his patterns, his designs are being stolen. So Molly has to pretend to be one of these workers, which of course made me interested again in that whole situation of the immigrants mainly who worked in these situations, and how badly the working situations were, even though at this point, well, this is actually, I think, it's either 1901 or 1902 at this point, but it's really during the time right before people started itching to unionize, because it was so difficult, especially for these women in this situation. They had no rights. They got their time and their pay docked in any possible way, even if you had to get up and stretch for a minute, if you had to use the bathroom, any kind of thing. And it was so unfair. And so, of course, it got me interested in that time period. But maybe fast forward 10 years to the triangle shirtwaist disaster. And so I started a book, but I haven't finished it yet, about that particular problem, that particular disaster, that tragedy, which is a major workplace thing that happened, that changed everything for unions and everybody. It was very important, and I'm not going to get into it now because I'm about to tangent. But it's important because it kind of is, even though it's not the same place. I think that's used as inspiration for a lot of what is written here, because of course there is a strike, and I don't want to get too far into the story because that would be bad. But there are different gangs involved that she finds herself a little bit entangled with. There's still the police chief who she has a romantic relationship with, and then there's a possible other romantic relationship she could get into with someone involved with the unions. So another kind of a love triangle, maybe. And then, of course, there's a coincidence between the two cases that she's working on, which kind of annoys me whenever there's a big coincidence. It's like, oh, yeah, no. But I still really enjoyed it. I still get that feeling of early 20th century New York, and it's gotten me so interested in reading more about that, not just the triangle, but I found another book actually related to that more, maybe a decade or so earlier, a nonfiction book that I might get into at some point. But of all the books, who knows when I'll actually get to it. But it is something I thought to maybe make a little project of my own, yet another one that I will be working on for a million years. Last, but I don't think least, but still, the worst cover, I think, no offense to cats, I'm a cat person, and I'm usually attracted to books, mystery books with a cat in the cover, especially when there's cats in books. But this is Arsenic with Austin by, how could I forget, Catherine Bolger Hyde. So, yes, another mystery. This cat, I don't know. Isn't that kind of a creepy looking cat? Anyway, there's a cat here named Bustifer, who is the main cat character, but there are 3 of them in the story. But the story goes along the lines of this woman named Emily Kavanaugh, who is a teacher, and she's very, very into literature, especially. And she's in near Portland, and her great aunt, I believe, dies. Beatrice, her name is, dies and leaves her a lot more than she expected. But because Emily was just excited, maybe to, not that she liked that her aunt died, but she was excited to inherit her library, which I understand. But it turns out she leaves her a great deal, which maybe some people in the area and some other relatives of relatives are not crazy about. So when Emily goes up to the funeral and goes to speak to the lawyers and everything, she realizes that there is a possibility that her aunt, even though she was up there in years, did not die of natural causes. It seems to be arsenic. So she reconnects with someone in the past, from her way past. Emily is middle-aged at this point. She's already a widow. In the beginning, she sort of kind of has like imaginary conversations with her dead husband, which I was like, oh, is this going to be a thing now? But it didn't really last for very long. So she reconnects with this man who also is like the sheriff in the town. So of course he can help her investigate, which is good. And so she has to balance this whole, I'm suddenly very rich and I have all these people I'm responsible for, and all these people who want her to maybe sell up and let developers do their thing, which she is not really on board with. And of course the very scary threat of, someone tried to kill and succeeded in killing the person I inherited from. Is this going to affect me even more so? And how could I find out, also just for the sake of her own relative who she obviously cared about, even though they didn't see each other for a long time. So I don't know. Anyway, so one of the things she uses to investigate, and I think this is going to be the premise of the series, is her love for reading. So a lot of it, the story itself has some thoughts, some inspiration from Persuasion by Jane Austen, which is always fun for me because that's my favorite Jane Austen, and so that's why it's called Arsenic with Austen. But yeah, she's reading Jane Austen at the time, and not just Persuasion. And different things she reads helps her to come up with ideas of how to, solve this mystery. So that's kind of, I thought, clever. Only two things I would say is that one, a lot of the book will kind of assume that you've already read a lot, and I say that because there's a part where basically there's spoilers given away about the book Strong Poison, which is a book I'm currently reading and had already intended to read as soon as possible. I had already known a lot about the story and what happened, but if you don't, you might get a little disappointed because, yes, there are spoilers. And of course, there are some minor spoilers for Jane Austen's books. So that was a little not off-putting, but a little like just be warned, I guess. It's a little weird how she's kind of like not into technology, like she doesn't have a cell phone. This was written around 2016. I sometimes think that's fun, but in the case of her and what her job is and everything, I don't really find that very believable. She likes to dress kind of Edwardian inspired, and I don't mind that per se. I like the fact that the protagonist is middle-aged. I always like that. And that she could have a whole new life and situation. She has a friend who is French and who is kind of a stereotype, I think, of a French person who is good with cats, but the whole story with Emily's own cats trying to get along with the other cat now, Bustopher, didn't seem very realistic to me, but I'm not an expert on cats, even if I love them. And there are also a lot of quotes, biblical quotes, because it turned out the character is actually quite Christian and goes to church and stuff like that. So I guess there are people who might find that off-putting. I certainly didn't, because, I do read the Bible. So I found it actually interesting how that kind of connected and everything. But that, just, it wasn't something I expected when I read the premise. So that might surprise some people. But I don't think disappointing. I thought it was good. I probably will continue with this series. I didn't think it was like overwhelmingly amazing, but enough for me to be curious to see how the rest of the series goes, or at least the second book. So yeah, a good month, just lacking in nonfiction, at least finishing in nonfiction. Let me know what you've enjoyed in the month of April, and until next time, this is Catherine at Taking Tea with Catherine. Have a lovely tea and book-filled day.